Peace, I'm Molesey Bridgette of TheQueenCode, and welcome to our first masterclass in the Goddess series. So today we're starting with Goddess Auset, commonly known as Isis, the Kemetic ancient Egyptian goddess of resurrection, she of 10,000 names. This is her story. But before we dive deeply into her story, I want to share with you all how I came to the goddess path myself and started the Queen Code. I have been researching, studying, and embodying divine feminine principles and the stories of goddesses, priestesses, and queens for over 28 years. Herstory is my life's work. Since childhood, I've always been driven to know the deeper meaning of things, the origins of things. I love to read, I love to write, and in school, my favorite subject was history. So I love to learn the stories of how civilizations began. I love to be able to connect those dots. And my favorite time of year was February, Black History Month, because of course that was my story. And so when I was 16, I started doing pageants, and I had a pageant coach that would always have me quote and recite poems from Maya Angelou or quotes from powerful Black women like Shirley Chisholm, Fannie Lou Hamner, Dorothy Dandridge. And she would give me these pieces to read in my introduction, but I wanted to know more about these women. Who were they? And so this was back in the late 90s. We were just starting to get the internet. You know, not everyone had access to the internet. So I would have to walk to the public library and do the card catalog system and check out books about these women. And I would just read for hours, just very fascinated with their stories. And so that's where it started for me. And, you know, true to my love for, wanting to know why, how did this happen and connecting the dots, I began to go back even further. And that led me to studying the transatlantic slave trade. And eventually I began to go back even further. And it took some time, but that's when I began to find the ancient civilizations of Africa before the transatlantic slave trade. And a little bit further back than that, I found ancient Kemet, Egypt, and my world changed. By this time, I was 18 in college, and my dad bought me my first computer. So I had a computer, I had internet access in my college dorm, and this was the first time I had 24/7 access to study what I want, deep dive, and I would spend hours, sometimes 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, going down rabbit holes, studying ancient Kemet. And that's when I came across the first royal that really made an impact on my life, Queen T of the 18th dynasty of ancient Egypt. This woman blew me away. Her beauty, her achievements, her poise, her grace. I thought she looked like me. Again, a Nubian woman. So Nubia is the area of Sudan today. And she was powerful. She was the great wife of Amenhotep III. She was mother to the legendary, often called heretical king Akhenaten, Pharaoh Akhenaten. She was mother-in-law to the iconic Queen Nefertiti. And she was grandmother to probably the most famous pharaoh that we know of, King Tut. And so besides her lineage, she was also a diplomat. When her husband died at a very young age, she handled all affairs. Very powerful woman. And I remember when I went to Egypt this past year in 2025, and I went to the museum, the very first thing I saw was that iconic statue of her and her husband as soon as you walk in. And so at 18, though, back in college, she was the first royal that really made an impression on me. And I was just obsessed with her. I printed out a picture of her famous bust, put it on my college dorm. My friends would come in and think it was kind of weird. But at the same time, like, I really found purpose as I found her, and then continued to dig even more and found the goddesses and priestesses, the female pharaohs of Egypt. And so this for me is when purpose was unlocked. Since that time, I have traced the lineage of the divine feminine down through cultures, continents, and all through time. And eventually in 2009, I took all that I learned, and that's how the Queen Code was started. Long before history was carved into stone by conquering hands, before the ink of empires decided which names would be remembered and which would be buried, there were women who ruled kingdoms, commanded armies, healed nations, birthed civilizations, and guarded sacred knowledge beneath the stars. Long before the word power was narrowed to domination, it moved through priestesses, queens, mothers, mystics, builders, and warriors whose wisdom shaped the rhythm of earth itself. Their stories were sung in temples, etched into pyramids, whispered in groves, carried in bloodlines. Herstory is the living memory of feminine sovereignty, and it has never been lost, only buried. This goddess series shines light on that lineage. To reclaim herstory is a reclamation of the archetypes that still move within us. Inside each goddess lives a missing instruction for wholeness, an ancient map for what the psyche forgot when it learned to survive by splitting. The divine feminine returns because the mind cannot stay fractured forever. Her reemergence is the reassembly of what has been divided. Herstory restores coherence. When we awaken the great queen within, we remember who we are. The stories of goddesses always had the purpose of developing your sovereignty, becoming your own person, being anchored from within, being clear about your identity. It's in remembering the stories of the goddesses that we remember that we're human and divine. The power of herstory cannot be understated. It's a critical missing link to restore coherence to the mind. We understand history, but when we begin to understand herstory, it gives us a fuller view. It gives us the complete picture. And with the complete picture, we move into a place of authentic power. So let's get into the story of Auset. Auset, commonly known as Isis, and Asar, commonly known as Osiris, were brother and sister, husband and wife, king and queen of Egypt during the Golden Era. They ruled in balance and harmony. Their brother Set could not stand the light they carried, so he devised a plan to kill Osiris, to dethrone Isis, and to take the throne for himself. It was a destiny swap. So he built a beautiful chest measured exactly to Osiris's body. And he had this huge party, invited everyone and Osiris, but he didn't invite Isis. And he gave this huge feast and presented the chest as a gift to anyone who could actually fit the chest. Now, of course, it was laid out to Osiris's exact measurements. So when everyone else laid in the chest, of course, it didn't fit. But when Osiris got in, it fit him perfectly. His brother Set slammed it shut, locked it, and threw it in the Nile River, drowning Osiris. He betrayed them. When Isis heard the news of the death, she let out a cry that split the sky. She shaved her head, she tore her robes, and she walked for years. She walked the earth asking every creature, every stone, have you seen him? Eventually, Isis recovered the coffin, and when Set heard that she recovered the body of Osiris, he wanted to make sure that Isis couldn't resurrect him. So he found Osiris's dead body and dismembered him into 14 pieces. And he scattered the pieces all over the earth. But Isis was determined, and she began her search again. She grieved. Her tears became her superpower. With every tear that fell, her perception sharpened. Her strength was renewed. She reclaimed 13 pieces, all of them but one. Osiris's phallus had been thrown into the sea and eaten by fish. Using old magic, love, and powerful words, she breathed the breath of life and resurrected Osiris. And through immaculate conception, their son Haru, or Horus, was conceived. To protect him from his evil uncle Set, she hid her infant in the papyrus marshes, raised him in secret, and when he was grown, he defeated his uncle Set and reclaimed the throne. Now, even if you haven't heard this story before, I'm sure parts of it sounds very familiar. It's a tale as old as time. The betrayal, the journey to redemption. We can hear parts of the Cain and Abel story in this story. We hear parts of the Christian story of Mary having to hide Jesus. But this is originally the story of Goddess Isis. And I share her story as well as many other goddess stories in my book, 31 Goddesses Rise Sovereign. This book is a wonderful companion to our goddess series, our masterclass series. And if you don't have it by now, I'll drop the link in the comment section or in the caption of this video, depending on where you're watching this video. But the story of Goddess Isis, Herstory, this is not just a story about bringing a man back to life. This is not just a love story about a woman saving her man. is so much deeper than that. In these videos, I'm going to take the story of Goddess Isis and break them down because there's so much to this story that I want to unpack. We're going to look at the story in 4 key aspects to understand inner mysteries of story, to understand the deeper meaning of story. You typically want to look at them in 4 different ways. So the first way that we're going to look at her story is psychologically, the mind. Okay, so when you're looking at ancient stories, any deeper story, there's usually a psychological aspect. It's telling you something very powerful about how the mind works. The second way we're going to break this down is transformational, the soul. The third way is seasonal, the earth, right? So how this story plays out and how it really mirrors what happens in the seasons. We're also going to take a look at how this story plays out astronomically in the heavens. So the 4 key ways: psychological, transformational, seasonal, and astronomical. And that literally is the mind, the soul, earth, and heaven. And this is the ancient way. These stories were told to unite the above with the below, the within with the without, the body and the soul. It was all about coherence. It was all about the integration of the mind. And so we tell these stories to unify opposites. We're also going to take a 5th historical view of this story. So the historical view, and really connecting this original story to a lot of stories that came after, like I shared before, the story of Cain and Abel, the story of Jesus, and so much more, because Isis's story and many herstories, like even the descent of Inanna, were the original blueprints for a lot of stories that came later from different religions, from other fairy tales. And so we're going to take that historical view and we're going to connect the dots from what came after, but really elevating herstory as the original blueprint. But back to Isis. The ancient Egyptians called her Waret Hakah, the great one of magic. And her story, this story of betrayal, the betrayal that scatters, the grief that kills the old identity, and then the rebirth that happens after, this actually became the blueprint for how humans became divine. This became the blueprint for the process that the pharaohs went through in order to establish the divine right to sit on the throne. Because to the ancient Egyptians, the great goddess Isis was the throne. Like literally, that's what her name Auset in its original form, Auset, asked. It meant throne. And it was so true to that meaning that when a pharaoh went through this process of resurrection, of being born again, and sat on that throne, it was said that he was sitting on his mother's lap. She was the throne. That is one of her many 10,000 names, she, the throne. And so the way of the goddess, this ancient way, this journey of soul retrieval, remember, this isn't just a story about saving her husband. That's the outer meaning. The inner meaning is about soul retrieval. This process happens within all of us. When we are betrayed, when you are scattered, when the mind does fracture, going on that journey to reclaim those scattered pieces, the soul retrieval, going on that journey was a remembering, not just recalling the mind, but remembering, putting the pieces back together again. And when you remember, you gain deeper understanding. And when you gain understanding, that is where real power comes from. So for any royal, like a pharaoh, a female pharaoh, or even the priesthood, they had to go through this process again to be reborn of wisdom. And wisdom was she. And this is how the ancients honored her. Even in the Christian Bible, in the book of Proverbs, it's called Wisdom Speaks. I'll read a little bit here. This is the Message version of the Bible. Proverbs 8. Do you hear Lady Wisdom calling? Can you hear Madam Insight raising her voice? She's taken her stand at First and Main, at the busiest intersection, right in the city square, where the traffic is thickest. She shouts, "You, I'm talking to all of you. Everyone out here on the streets, listen, you idiots, learn good sense. You blockheads, shape up. Don't miss a word of this. I'm telling you how to live well. I'm telling you how to live at your best. My mouth chews and savors and relishes truth. I can't stand the taste of evil. She goes on to say, prefer my life disciplines over chasing after money, and God knowledge over a lucrative career. For wisdom is better than all the trappings of wealth. Nothing you could wish for holds a candle to her. I am Lady Wisdom, and I live next to sanity, she says. And she goes on to say, I am both insight and the virtue to live it out. With my help, leaders rule. Let's pause for a second, because again, this is what the ancients knew. You could not sit on a throne, Auset asked the great goddess, without going through the resurrection process of being reborn again, of wisdom and insight. And again, this is really what the story of the resurrection story was all about. And so she says, I love those who love me. Those who look for me find me. Wealth and glory accompany me. Also substantial honor and a good name. She goes on to say a lot more, but Proverbs 8 is one of my favorite verses in the Christian Bible, because this is one of the places where you see the goddess, where you see her show up. And we know that the wisest man, according to the Bible, Solomon, he built many great temples. We're going to talk about the goddess being a builder in just a second, but he put wisdom before him, and the ancients knew wisdom as the great goddess. And so historically, that's the space that she holds. She was the container for new life. She was the container for expanded consciousness and awareness. And to the ancients, not only was she the great mother, not only was she literally the throne, but she was also the great teacher. As I said before, it was she, the great goddess, that taught the builders of the pyramid. It was she, in her many forms, one as goddess Seshat, that literally taught the people how to build pyramids. And even on the temple walls in Egypt, you see goddess Seshat teaching the ceremony of stretching the cord, where she was teaching the people how to measure accurately so that every monument was immaculate. And that's exactly what they did. They built monuments, many of them far older than modern Egyptologists are telling us. For those of us that have been studying ancient Kemet and ancient Egypt for many years, it is common knowledge that the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid is much older than modern Egyptologists or mainstream Egyptologists tell us today. But I have been gathering evidence myself from other scholars and just things that I've researched and pieced together for years. And my working theory is not only that the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid, which is commonly believed to have been built by Khufu in the 4th dynasty, not only do I believe that the Giza Plateau is much older than 4,500 years, I also believe that the Giza Plateau is actually a place of the goddess, that it's actually goddess Isis's domain, and that the pyramids on that site were goddess temples. That is my working theory. So there exists an inventory stela that was found in 1858 by Auguste Mariette near Giza's Temple of Isis. And this inventory stela, this stone tablet, was said to be a 26th dynasty document that was actually telling of information that existed long before. And so the inventory stela, which I tried to find, by the way, when I went to Egypt last year, I was told that it was housed in the Egyptian Museum of Antiquities in Cairo. I went to the museum and I had a whole checklist of things that I wanted to see there. And then, of course, just being open to everything else I could see. I was at the museum for about 7 hours. And I remember asking just a few people there that could actually speak English, because the one thing that I didn't realize when I booked my solo trip to Egypt, in Egypt, English is not even a second language. I really couldn't find anybody that could speak English, and there were a lot of people there, but I did manage to ask a few people, where can I find the inventory stela? And they laughed because they were like, which one? what I realized is that every or most major monuments in Egypt have an inventory stela. And so I had to get a little more specific and say the one found at Giza is somewhere there. I was told I couldn't find it, but I did have the translation. And basically, this document, this tablet said that he, Khufu, found the house of Isis, mistress of the pyramid, beside the Sphinx, northwest of the house of Osiris. He restored her, Isis, temple of stone, renewed what he found there, and he restored the statues of the gods. He, Khufu, built his pyramid beside the temple of the goddess, and he built a pyramid for the king's daughter, Henutsen, beside his temple. The place of the Sphinx was beside the house of Isis, mistress of the pyramid. The image of the Sphinx was already there, guardian of that place. Now we know the Sphinx to be a guardian, right? And this inventory stela, this 26th dynasty document, which tells of an older account, clearly tells us the Sphinx was already there. Khufu did not build the Sphinx. He restored it. There was a temple of Isis that he supposedly restored, and that these monuments, the Sphinx at least, which is said today by mainstream Egyptologists to be 4,500 years old, this inventory stela says it was already there. And so for people like myself and many others that are really into ancient Kemetic history, herstory, we already believe that the entire Giza Plateau is way more ancient. If the inventory stela tells us that the Sphinx was already ancient in the days of Khufu, then I believe that Great Pyramid was as well. And I remember when I went to Egypt, and when I first got there, the very first day, it was my birthday, it was January 1st. And literally on my 42nd birthday, I am walking through the Great Pyramid. It was a dream come true. And I remember walking through that pyramid and just looking at the immaculate construction, walking all around the pyramid, just really looking at the original casing, the limestone at the bottom, just inventorying the entire place. And eventually, I think it was on days 4 and 5 that I finally got to visit the pyramids of Saqqara and Dashur. And I remember walking in the deserts of Saqqara and looking at the step pyramid, and walking inside the red pyramid at Dashur and looking at the other pyramids out in the desert of Dashur. And I'm just walking around that desert looking at the monuments, and I'm like, something isn't right.
This looks like a cone. That one. Very straight.
Yes, yes, that one is bent. Yes.
This one just looks like a smaller version of the Great Pyramid.
Actually, they cover the bent pyramid from the top till the bottom. Okay. You can see here in the middle, we have some steel. Those steel stuff.
The chronology, the timeline the mainstream Egyptologists present when it comes to the pyramid building, intuitively, it did not feel right to me. So, according to mainstream Egyptologists, you have the step pyramid being built around 2630 BC. It's said to be the first pyramid. Then you have Sneferu's pyramid built in 2600. And then you have the bent pyramid built around the same year. And then you have the red pyramid supposedly built about 10 years later. This was the world's first successfully completed true smooth side pyramid, right? Third largest in Egypt. And then about 30 years after that, they're saying that the Great Pyramid was built. And then, of course, came the other pyramids on Giza Plateau. And as I'm standing there in Egypt, in the desert of Dashur, I'm like, this isn't right, because I was in the Great Pyramid, and that immaculate construction doesn't seem like they worked up to that. When I saw the step pyramid in Saqqara, when I saw all of those other pyramids, they all looked like attempts to copy what was already there at Giza. Giza was there first, and all the other ones were copycats, I believe. And so even when you look in mainstream Egyptology, and when you look at the lineage of pyramids built, they say that pyramid building reached its peak with the Great Pyramid, and then they became of lesser quality after that. Because Giza, that pyramid was the first. When I came back from Egypt, I shared a lot of, photos and videos of my trip. And there was this one particular video that I did where I was sharing me riding up to the Sphinx and the first time I ever saw her. And the caption of the video, I have it here, it said, "What if the Sphinx at Giza is a Black woman? What if she is older than they told us?" Now, the video went viral, but not for the reason that I would have liked. It went viral because most people just scanned the first two lines of the caption, and people just got set off. What do you mean? Of course it's a Black person. And I mean, I grew up hearing that it was either the pharaoh Khufu or his son Khafre. It clearly has high cheekbones and Black African features. And there's also evidence that there was a different head up there that would have been more anatomically correct for the body. But, the video, there was a lot of negativity under it. But the purpose of the video was to state evidence that she is she. So not the male pharaoh Khufu or the male pharaoh Khafre, but some lioness guarding the monuments of the great goddess. And so the rest of the caption goes on to say, this is a video from my trip to Egypt. Here she sits, half lion, half woman, carved from stone, not just 4,500 years ago, but longer, perhaps longer, before dynastic Egypt came to power. Geological studies show that water erosion on the Sphinx body are patterns caused by heavy rainfall, not wind. But Egypt hasn't seen rain like that since 7,000 to 10,000 BC. This evidence, led by geologist Dr. Robert Scope, suggests she may date back to a time when the Nile Valley was still green. Even the ancient Egyptians left us a clue. I went on to talk about the inventory stela, saying that Giza was once a temple of Isis. Directly quoted Isis, mistress of the pyramid. And I'll go in a second and tell you what that means. But it says that Khufu, of course, didn't build the Sphinx. He found her. And she was already ancient in his time. But it's the stars that reveal her secret. The Sphinx faces due east at dawn on the spring equinox in 10,500 BCE. The constellation Leo, the lion, rose precisely where she gazed. Precessional dating tells us this alignment happens once every 26,000 years. Heaven and earth, lion to lion, a cosmic mirror, as above, so below. And so I go on to talk about how this is how ancient astronomer priests built things. They always aligned earthly monuments to heavenly bodies. And so if the Sphinx predates dynastic Egypt, we must ask, who placed her there? What divine purpose did she serve? And the end of the caption reads, "I believe the Sphinx is a monument to the Great Mother, a remnant of a lost civilization, one that honored the feminine as divine, one that knew the earth as sacred, the stars as teachers, and the goddess as eternal. The Sphinx, she protects the temples of the Great Mother, older than empire, deeper than myth. In her silence, she is calling us to remember." So if we look at Robert Bauval's theories, precessional dating, that Sphinx and the pyramids there would be at least 12,500 years old. If we date it back to 10,500 BC, that's 12,500 years old, and it could be even much older than that. And so when we think about the mistress of the pyramid, the inventory stela calls her this, other documents call her this. When we think about the mistress of the pyramid, it literally means that Auset is the sovereign ruler, guardian, and spiritual authority of that sacred structure. The pyramid is her domain, her house, her body of power. And that would make sense because pyramids were not tombs. There were never any mummies found in the Great Pyramid. This is one of the first things I learned. One of the things that had me going down rabbit holes in my college dorm, there were never any mummies found there because they were not tombs. They were wombs of consciousness. The way the ancients built things, not only did earthly bodies mirror the heavenly bodies, but everything had a multiple layered purpose. And so the pyramids, as wombs of consciousness, they were centers of resurrection, they were conscious and energy generators, they were power plants, frequency generators. They were places where you elevated your consciousness. I believe the pyramid at Giza is not only a goddess temple, but also a resurrection machine. And that will make so much sense that she, the goddess of resurrection, this would be her domain. She was and is the mistress of the pyramid. But so much has to be restored. I mean, even the crown of the Great Pyramid is gone. The capstone is gone. The original casing is gone. I had the pleasure of putting my eyes on that original limestone casing, that beautiful white casing when I was there, but the capstone is gone. The Great Pyramid has no crown. And so much has to be restored, and it starts with the restoration of Herstory. And so this is the first video about the great goddess Auset, commonly known as Isis. But we are going to take, as I said before, a much deeper dive because this story is incredibly relevant to us today. Even on the outer level, we've all experienced betrayal. We've all experienced the shattering of what comes after. And betrayal can look so very different to many of us. Many of us experienced the first betrayal in childhood with the abandonment of a parent, or maybe it is the loss of protection of a parent, or maybe experiencing betrayal in a relationship with a friend, with family members. But we've experienced betrayal. And oftentimes when you have dealt with betrayal, what comes next is self-abandonment. There's a part of us that becomes shattered, scattered, even parts of us that become stuck or frozen in time. And we all have to take that journey of reclaiming those scattered pieces to become whole again. And this is about soul retrieval, because when you go through a transformation, not everything shattered do you want to reclaim, but we're talking about the awareness of who we really are. And we're talking about coming back into a sense of wholeness again. The story of Goddess Isis is about reclaiming your identity after loss and becoming something much greater. So if you have my book, 31 Goddesses Rise Sovereign, turn to the first chapter. That's the chapter about Goddess Isis. At the end of that chapter, I have some questions, some journaling prompts that can help you begin your own reclaiming journey. Okay, so this is just the beginning. This is the first video and many more to come. And I look forward to taking this goddess journey with you. Bye for now.